Hey everyone, welcome to another Slasher Trash live event. As always, I am your host, Daniel. I am the producer of the Slasher Trash documentary, and I'm joined by I'm joined by the EP of the film and creator of the Slasher Trash community, Gareth Slash Trash Morgan, as well as a very special guest who I'm sure you're all familiar with, but we'll get to his introduction very soon. Before we get on with that, I am just going to give you all, as we start all these events, with a production update, let you know how Slash Trash is going, what we've been up to, and how the whole thing's unfolding. So, you'll notice that Michael Gingold, our director and writer, is not on these events from now. That's because he's very, very, very busy writing the whole production. So we have passed 15 interviews now. I'm not sure of the exact number because we've just done a big cavalcade of them and we've got stuff coming and there's things like in the calendar. There's so many bits and moving pieces to these things, it's hard to keep track of. I do have it written down, but like a absolute professional, I haven't brought that note with me. But I know that we have brought in over 15 interviews now. Excellent, excellent. Every single one of them excellent. And one of those fantastic interviews was, of course, with the lovely Mark Polonia, who joins us today. If you don't know who Mark Polonia is, you should, because he is the absolute kind of royalty that we need in this documentary. He is a master micro budget filmmaker who has done, what is it now, over 100 films, Mark?
126.
126 films, often in the micro budget genre, and not and fairly often a lot of them slashers. So we brought him in today to talk to all of you guys, and you get to ask him some questions. So let's just get right into it. We'll start with a fairly open question. Let me just bring them up again. So Scott Cole asks, speaking of your massive, massive number of films, Scott Cole asks, you have directed everything from monsters to aliens to killer sharks. Which creature was the most fun or most frustrating to bring to life on a micro budget? Let's do both those. Let's hear what your most fun and most frustrating was. Let's do that like a two-part question. So, first of all, what was the most fun creature to bring to life on a micro budget?
Well, first, I'd like to say hello to everyone and thank you for having me on the show. It's an honor. To answer your question, it's almost twofold. When you're working in micro budget, any creature or monster is difficult to bring to the screen. But hands down, it's always sharks because as Steven Spielberg put it, you're out on the water. You can't control anything. You've got props that float away. You're hanging off boats. You're in boats, following people with boats. It's really a lot to coordinate, and you're at the mercy of the tide of the ocean or the lake or wherever you're at shooting. So I would have to say sharks are the number one challenging type of film or creature to bring to life.
And are they also the most fun or just the most frustrating? Is it a combination of both of those aspects?
Well, it's fun and frustrating. I'd hate to say anything negative because filmmaking is a blast. It's challenging. You really have to, when you make a shark movie, you really have to see the attack scenes in your head. You have to know what to shoot and then how to cut it and kind of put it all together. So when you're shooting it, when you're out there live on location, a lot of actors they tend to look a little lost because they really don't understand what you're doing, even though you explain it and okay, grab this shark prop and thrash around, and they don't see the camera shaking and all that other stuff. So as a director and an editor, I could see it in my head. So I know what pieces I need to get to make that attack work, or how the fin has to come into the shot, and where the big prop mouth has to go and all that kind of stuff. So it's always fun. It really is. I don't think in my entire 40 plus years of making films I could say it's I've had a bad experience, because I really haven't. Some days are more challenging than others, obviously, but that's par for the course.
Of course, of course. So, obviously, you brought lots to the table throughout your career. But one of the reasons you are in slasher trash specifically is you have created a lot of slasher films. In fact, your first commercial film was Splatter Farm, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yes, correct. And that is a pseudo slasher film. It's not your traditional slasher film because slasher films, they're their own genre and they have different compartments in that. They have the killer who's masked and you don't know who they are. You have the killer who's identified early on in the movie. You have parental psychopaths, children psychopaths. We chose the route of having our killer identified right from the start because we had so few cast members. We realized we can't sustain the mystery for too long without people getting bored and shooting this movie for literally nothing. That was the approach we took, and Splatter Farm. If you could compare it to anything, it does remind me now that I look at it of Three on a Meat Hook. It has that ambience to it. And again, that's all. When you're making a movie, you're not thinking about that kind of stuff. Even though as creators and filmmakers, you are influenced by what you liked, what you saw, and I think it creeps into what you do subconsciously. So
So the reason I ask about Splatter Farm is because I know that was your first commercial release, but one of the questions we've had from Eric is how did you first get into making slasher films? So could you tell us the story? Because you were very, very young when you made Splatter Farm, right? Very young, you and your brother.
17, we had just graduated from high school.
Amazing, amazing. So how exactly does that happen? How do two 17-year-olds create a commercial slasher film right out of high school? How does that go? How does that even begin to occur?
Well, you have to kind of backtrack and to just keep it short, my brother and I, decided early on, 5 or 6, that we wanted to make movies after we saw Godzilla versus the Thing on TV. And from that time on, we wrote scripts. We'd go to the library to get books about filmmaking, just to understand this process. And when we were 11, we bought our first Super 8 camera and we would shoot Super 8 movies, and they were slasher movies because that's really what we could afford to do. So we shot The Killer, The Killer's Revenge, Mad Slasher, Bloodthirsty Butcher. These were Super 8 shorts. Then we moved into more polished productions with sound and special effects and music, and we did a Halloween Night 1 and 2. We did a film called The Night Johnny Came Home, which got lost at the Cinemagic Film Search, and we never got it back. But that's where it started. And again, you have to remember, video was a rich kid's toy at that point, so we certainly couldn't afford that. But eventually, by the time we got into senior high, we got a hold of a video camera, realized that it's a lot cheaper to make a movie, although technically you really had to relearn a lot of what you knew. And we started shooting a cult movie called Church of the Damned, which eventually got released like 35 years later. And then we shot another movie that was more successful and finished, Hallucinations. And then we graduated and realized, we got to do something with our life. So over the summer of 1986 or 87, I can't remember which, we shot Splatter Farm. And the reason we shot that was because we had access to this farm location. Like, we could go anywhere, do anything we wanted. So that was kind of the catalyst of the project. When you're making micro budget movies, especially at we were 17, we all we could do was take advantage of what was around us, and we were smart enough and had enough experience to uh, take all that and mold it into a horror story and set it on this farm. And of course we had we knew, based on Last House on the Left and I Spit on Your Grave, and those types of films that you have to shock people to kind of make your mark and get your attention. So that's why the film's as disgusting as it is in certain parts. But that was intentional because we knew, we were in the cinema world nobodies at the time, and we had to make something no one else did, could, or would. And Splatter Farm is sort of the direct result of all those years of all that, and growing up watching slasher movies and giallo movies and stuff like that. So it really is kind of the uh, the launching pad for everything that came after that.
It's funny that you just mentioned Halloween Night 1 and 2 because it looks like we've got a long-time fan in the comments there. Bill Casanelli says,
Oh,
I first met Mark with John in 1987, and they sent me a tape with two shorts, Halloween Night 1 and 2. Loved the Scarecrow and the Stove Kill. I think you mentioned that a lot of your shorts are lost media now, but he did ask, is it true that they are available on an SRS cinema disc?
yes. The funny thing about our career is that everything we've ever done, literally, with the exception of the night Johnny came home because it does not exist, it's out there for people to see. So if you're a real, masochist, you could start at our first short and watch the progression from all that to Church of the Dam, Hallucinations, Splatter Farm, and whatnot, because we kept all that stuff and we transferred it to video, and later in life we edited some of those together in films like Channel 13 and Death Reel. You could see that, and then there's a couple movies, a couple films that have stuff as extras, like our early shorts. They were silent, but John and I did commentary and did our best to remember, what it was like. And I remember Bill I think sent us a movie he might have made too. And we're talking back in the cinemagic days when that's the only way you could really connect with people, because you didn't know what anyone else was doing unless you opened up the cinemagic to the producer's bulletin board and you saw like-minded people doing the things that you were doing.
Amazing stuff. Now, our EP Gareth. So I'm a big slasher fan, but our EP Gareth is like the biggest slasher fan on the planet, like bar none. And so, although I will carry on with questions from the fans. I would be remiss because he's been very quiet, bless him, hasn't been able to get a word in edgeways. I'd be remiss if I didn't throw it to Gareth. Gareth, do you have any questions you would like to ask Mark Polonia?
Yeah, I mean, just Mark just touching upon then about all of the earlier work that you did before Splatter Farm. I was just wondering, three in a meat hook, which I actually caught up with recently, and I think it's fantastic. What other sort of slashers or proto slashers sort of influenced your work with your brother early on?
Well, we were lucky because we grew up at just the right time. We grew up when cable television started becoming a thing, HBO, but we would watch Chiller Theater out of Pittsburgh with Bill Cardille, and I remember the first slasher movie I ever saw was Silent Night, Bloody Night, and the scene where that guy axes Patrick O'Neill and that hot chick to death in the bed is, I mean, it made me queasy. I was not ready for that. I was probably 7 years old, maybe. And then the next week, they showed a British film, which was called Horror House with Frankie Avalon. And, it has that gory murder at the beginning, and then it's a lot of, British mod blabbery and, all that kind of double talk. And they go back to the house, and then you kind of get shocked awake when, he gets knifed in the groin and he's spitting blood up all over the place. As a 7 or 8 year old, you're just not ready for that kind of stuff. And, from there, it was probably, saw some things on HBO, but then the slasher boom really took off. I did not see Halloween in the theater. I wasn't allowed to go see it. I don't know why, but I wasn't. But I did get to see Terror Train, in the theater, and I got to see a double feature at the drive-in of Friday the 13th Part 2 and My Bloody Valentine. And I have to tell you, life doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah, that's amazing stuff. Like, I think Friday the 13th Part 2 is an extremely underrated one in the
It
pantheon of the Friday the 13th films. I particularly adore the Baghead Jason look
is.
before you got the guy iconic hockey mask.
The
And
town
the hockey mask,
down the
yeah,
dreaded sundown, and it's funny because a lot of the original classics, Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, these were comparatively low budget movies, but they made a fortune. In the sequels, you can tell the production value's gone up 1,000-fold. You watch Friday the 13th, which is a well-made movie for what it costs. But you look at the sequel, and they're using steady cams. They're just doing all this stuff that it just has such a glossy feel to it. You can
there's
tell.
like a
Yeah,
yeah, there's like a car gets smashed up at one point if I remember rightly, isn't it? When she turns on the headlights and he's there. Am I remember? It's been a while since I've watched Friday the 13th, but I'm
yeah,
sure he puts
she
in.
hits her with a car, but
Yeah.
it has this slick look that really betrays what I think people at the time thought a slasher movie should look like.
Mm.
And Halloween is a damn good looking movie. Even right out of the gate, Friday the 13th had more money, but I don't think they had Dean Cundy, so that makes a difference. But nonetheless, you could see where the sequels to these franchises would go, and ultimately, I think all of them fell off the wagon at one point or another. But that's going to happen when you make 10 or 11 movies of
Yeah.
the same thing.
But
Jump
you're
in the
right though.
shark.
Yeah, exactly.
Jump
But
in
you're
the
right though.
shark.
That original Halloween just looks tremendous. What always strikes me is amazing about it is it's got such an October feel,
Mm-hmm.
and they filmed it, I'm pretty sure, in the middle of summer, and they just like kind of decorated it all with like autumn leaves and stuff, and it just screams, that kind of season, that period. It evokes, without even Michael Myers being there, it evokes such a Halloween
Yeah,
atmosphere.
the ambience, and that's
Yeah.
key because when you're shooting a movie in Southern California in July that's supposed to take place in East Coast United States in October, there's a big difference. And that was one thing we always tried to do in our movies is our slasher movies, and especially if they took place at Halloween, is imbue them with that kind of an atmosphere. We'd bag leaves up in the summer, so we'd have them later on. If we had to reshoot stuff in the summer, we could dress stuff up and make it look like fall. And honestly, I think our movie, The Stalking, has more Halloween atmosphere than Halloween does. But we had the benefit of shooting it in October in Pennsylvania, so you get that head start.
Yeah, definitely. So, obviously, you work very much in the realm of micro budgets. You've worked in low budget films for your whole career. But a question from Sharon is, what is your dream project if money and resources were no object? Now, I know that's a huge question. You might not have an answer off the top of your head, but what's your best you can give with for that?
You know, you always have a dream project. I have a couple in my head that I don't want to reveal, but they're definitely horror inspired. One would be a big budget remake of the lost film The Night Johnny Came Home. I actually wrote a script for that, and it's uh, it's really cool. If I could remake any movie with unlimited resources, I would probably remake Horror Express. I think that movie's fantastic. I could probably make it for half what they made it for. But yeah, it's funny because a lot of people, filmmakers in particular, look at budgets as a restriction. I look at it as a challenge. Here's the thing: anybody in the world could make a movie for 150 million bucks. If you gave a stranger that, they'd just go hire all the people they could with that money. But give people three, four, $5,000 and say, go do the same thing. It's a whole different dynamic. It changes the way you look at everything. There's no such thing as a problem, only a solution, and you can't throw money at it. So you got to make movies on your feet. You make decisions all the time, every 10 minutes, good or bad. You got to make decisions, but that's the fun part about it. It's not having enough money to do something isn't restriction. It's challenge, and that's how I always looked at it, and I probably will the rest of my career. So I don't know as if I'd want to make a movie for $40 million. It doesn't
Mm.
sound like a lot of fun.
No, you're
You feel
totally
like you've been
right.
wasteful.
Yeah, absolutely. But you're totally right. Speaking as somebody who's also made an indie film on literally £5,000, um, you find that everything you're saying sort of like rings true to my experience of that as well. So one of the things I found, I made a little horror film called The August Club for the film festival circuit. Mostly is just a creative outlet, just something I really wanted to do. And what ended up happening with me is we had like a vampire and we needed a vampire's lair, and we literally just could not find a place that would let us, use the area as a vampire's lair on the budget we had. We did eventually find like this church with like a crypt beneath it, and they were like, "Oh, you can shoot in the crypt and stuff," and it was going to be amazing. But then they backed out at the last minute when they realized after reading the script that the cross was used as a weapon at one point, and they were like, "Oh no, that's a bit too blasphemous for us." But like you say, sort of problems become solutions because it forced us to move further afield than we would have liked to, and so we ended up driving over the border into Scotland, and we found this mansion called the Dunsky Estate, right in the sort of southwest corner of Scotland, I want to say. And the people there just really, really liked what we were doing. They just really like got along with us great, and they loved the idea and stuff. And that we ended up getting this mansion to use as the vampires' lair. Um, that we would have had to pay about £20,000 for, which was four times our entire budget. And they were like, "Oh, you can just have it for like 4 days for like 1,000." So we were like, "Great!" And it was only because we had such a low budget that we even had to go that far in the first place. Because if we'd had a higher budget, we would have
Mm,
settled for something worse,
right.
closer to us. Because oh yeah, we've got the money for that. Let's just pay for this cathedral or whatever. So yeah, it's great when you find those kind of little magic solutions to like low budget problems. So we've spoke a lot about a lot of your movies now. We've got another question in from a guy called Jason. He asks, "How do you make so many movies?"
That's a good question. First of all, I love making movies, and you have to be an efficient person. You have to be mindful of time, because when you make a movie, your biggest enemy isn't the weather. It's not money. It's not lack of equipment. Your biggest enemy is time, because it's the one thing you cannot control. You can work around everything else, but you can't stop time. So you really have to learn to be efficient, because you're not only is it your time, but all the creative people working with you, they don't want to stand around all day while you shoot a scene without them in it. So I break down a film. I schedule it. You look at the actors, their availability, locations, days. Okay, how long is it going to take us to travel from here to there? Because anytime you get in a car, you're losing an hour of your day. Period. It's People get lost. It takes time to get from A to Z. So you just learn all this stuff. It's really scheduling, and 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 I can conceive and edit a picture and deliver it to a distributor in a month, literally a month. Last year I made 12 films, and that's literally one a month. Although I did have one month where I didn't, but we shot two movies back to back, which I'd never done before. And I don't know if I do it again, but yeah, you have to be passionate about what you do. You have to be efficient, And with experience, it almost comes natural. I don't even think about it. I can read a script and start disseminating. Okay, I know it's going to take this long to do this. You sort of program it all together. And once you do that, then comes the creative part of shooting it. And you have to be efficient on the set. You can't just, when people ask you questions, you can't just look at them like, gee, I don't know. You got to have an answer right away. If it's raining out, you better have a backup plan. Always have a plan B. If an actor doesn't show up or they're late, what are we going to do? If they can't memorize their lines, how do we get through this so we're not wasting all day? There's just things you learn to maneuver through a day. And as a director, you're a lot of things. You're a disciplinarian. You're a friend. You're a listener. You're an artist. You're a psychologist. You're all this stuff at one time, and you're trying to get a vision on the screen with the help of other talented people. So, I mean, I could make one movie a year, but I guess I'm addicted to making films. So I can't not make films. I just, it's something I love to do, and I get a lot of enjoyment out of it.
Brilliant.
Do you enjoy being in front of the camera as well? That whole acting side of it, or is that something merely to sort of save a bit on the budget by playing a couple of roles?
I don't mind. I like acting. I can get through a role. I'm never going to win an Academy Award, but if push comes to shove, I could jump in and do it. And usually I've written the script, so I know it inside and out before we start shooting. But it's fun. It's fun no matter what you're doing. You're always doing something. I show up early on the set. You set up the camera, set up the lights, get the microphone ready. I block it in my head. Talent shows up. You have a few seconds of niceties because we don't have time to talk all day, and they know that. They show up. Okay? Here's what they have: a schedule. They know what we're doing, and they have their wardrobe, which we picked out ahead of time. We usually have phone conversations to discuss characters, so we're not doing that on the set and wasting time. And you just start shooting, and you just keep going. And typically, in my career, I've never gone over schedule. I've been ahead of schedule, and most of the time on schedule. So and you have to know when to say, okay, we need to move on. We got enough. We have to, because people would want to do a scene over and over. You can't. And usually after 2 or 3 takes, you got the best you're gonna get. So you keep going. But if they feel like they need another take, we'll do it. We're not rushing through this like Ed Wood. But he had more money than I ever had. But it's planning, and it's really knowing. It's having a vision. When I write a script, I can see the whole thing. So when I show up, I know, okay, we're going to shoot. I know where the camera's going to be. I know what I want them to do. It's already pre-planned in my head. So there's not a lot of standing around staring into space trying to figure out what we're going to do next.
So we've spoke about some big, broad topics. How do you make so many movies? What's the best creature to adapt? But I'm gonna focus in because we've got a very, very, very specific question for you here, which I think is great. So Joanne asks, it was great to see the mask from Camp Blood First Slaughter make an appearance in the Satanic Penis Cult Massacre 2025 by Matty Calhoun, and was wondering what was the history and inspiration behind making the mask because it's epic.
The well, I can't take credit for any of that because the producer David Sterling sent me the mask, so that's kind of what I was. So obviously, someone else had the same idea. So great minds think alike. Yeah, I wish I had a more detailed, philosophical answer, but the bottom line is that's what the producer sent us. So that we modified it slightly, but that's what we used.
So, since you talk about producing and stuff as well, sort of a more filmmaking focused question. Obviously, you've worked a lot in micro budgets, and a lot of your films, you've already mentioned you can kind of get a film made and get it distributed as quick as possible. how let me just check who asked that. So David asks, how does that process work? How do you make these relationships and have this kind of churn where you can get things out in front of people rather than just making them for yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question, because when you start, you're making a film and you're searching for a distributor and you hope it works. Early on in our career, it didn't. We got ripped off just like everybody else, and that's par for the course. The positive side of that is you got exposure, which was more than a bounce check. So, but it comes with time. It comes with delivering a product. It comes with a reputation and a brand, and distributors over time recognize, oh, who are these guys? They make all these movies. We should get them to make one for us because they rent. And we slowly over time started to build working relationships with various companies like Wild Eye Releasing, Rob Hochschild, who first and foremost, he's my friend, but secondly, we work together, and that's what every filmmaker wants, because then you're not making orphan films that sit around for years, which is discouraging. You can show your movies to your friends, and that's great, but back in the day, you had to have a distributor. And it's like Roger Corman. He started making these low budget movies. He got connected with the Woolner brothers, with American International Pictures. He started his own company. The guy, he had roots everywhere, so he could make a movie and know, okay, I know this company will take this product. So it's it just widens the playing field, so to speak. A lot of times, these companies come to me with an idea and say, "Hey, would you be interested in making this?" I obviously most of the time say yes, and that's a great position to be in, to
Mm,
reach that level where you don't have to go scrounging around for work. I actually turn work down now, which I never thought when we were making Splatter Farm that would ever be the case, but again, it's longevity, it's staying in the business, it's developing relationships with positive people, and it grows from there. It's a good problem, actually.
absolutely. So just very quickly before we bump into the next question, Beta Collector 9343, just to respond to you real quick. The film is on Prime. It was on the Prime Video service at one point. I'm not sure if it's still on there, but I'm pretty sure it's available to rent. I think I might have put it up for free on YouTube at one point. If you just want to search the August Club Dan Drambles, it's probably on there. But to move back onto the focus of today. So going back into questions for Mark, Gary asks, do you think slashers work best when they are low budget and low fi rather than major studio?
That's a great question, and it's it's always the big boys always are late to the game. Halloween, Friday the 13th. These were independent filmmakers just doing their thing, and Paramount would never have made Friday the 13th. They were embarrassed that they even have the franchise. But I think you could throw a ton of money at a slasher movie and you get Scream, which a lot of people like. I personally am not a fan of those movies. I think I Know What You Did Last Summer is better than any of them, but that's my opinion. But I think again, low budget doesn't mean low fi. Low budget means you've got to be creative and resourceful to get your vision out there, to get your story told, and to get your film released. So I've seen $100 million movies that I can't remember after I get done seeing them, but
Mm,
I can watch a low budget movie and I remember everything about it. So the bottom line is again, it's not what a movie costs. It's, are you being entertained? And I could recite every line from The Beast from Haunted Cave, but if you said, what was Star Wars The Force Awakens about? I saw it. I have no idea. I mean, that just emptied out of my brain that quick. So um, I think low budget filmmakers are always ahead of the big guys because they're willing to take chances. They have to think differently than a major studio does. They're willing to tackle subject matter that a major company may not. They will eventually and gloss it all over, but anything that happens big in the film world usually started somewhere with a small independent.
Totally, totally. I mean, even if you look, because you noted Scream is like being one of the big studio examples, there was lots of films prior to that doing the whole meta angle. Even it was sort of I know Nightmare on Elm Street's a big studio movie, but if you go to the tail end of that franchise with Wes Craven's New Nightmare, one of the lower budget films of the franchise, that, was kind of playing with the meta. And there's, I forget what it's called now. It might even be called Scary Movie. Gareth, you might know this. There's like a meta-textual slasher film that predates Scream that's much more independent. What am I thinking of?
Probably Scary Movie with John
Yeah.
Hawkes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, see, so there's lots of things have their roots in like independent cinema. I think you're right to kind of point that out. Um, while we're on the topic of low budget, high budget studio slashers, across all of slashers, Sarah would like to know, what are y'all's favorite slasher movies?
Boy,
Big question.
yeah, that's a big. Is there really a bad slasher movie? I guess we have to. I guess we have
No,
to say that there's. I've never seen one I've absolutely hated. I've seen a lot, probably most of the slasher movies ever made, from some crimies to Italian giallos to proto slasher like uh, Black Christmas, and then you launch into the first wave of real American splatter films. I Madman is one I really like, and I think I like it because it really imbues what a camp slasher movie is all about. Um, and obviously there's the big three: Halloween, Friday the 13th, and Nightmare on Elm Street. I like a lot of those films, some less than others, but I like some of the more lower budgeted stuff like Satan's Blade and Hollywood's New Blood or something like that. The real oddities that are out there, The Dorm That Dripped Blood, which was called Pranks, Rituals. There's so many out there that kind of live in the shadow of Halloween and Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street. And I discover new ones every day. So I don't dislike any slasher movie. But Madman is a really good one. The Burning I really like. Terror Train, obviously. My Bloody Valentine. Prom Night. The list goes on and on.
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback on your sentiments with Madman, I think Madman is so interesting because Friday the 13th is kind of the poster boy for like that camp by the lake, big slasher movie with a bunch of like horny teens getting killed. But like somehow that image that pop culture has of the camp slasher movie that is synonymous with Friday the 13th, like Madman in a lot of ways is more Friday the 13th than Friday the 13th is.
Yes.
It's more woodsy, it's more campy, it's more horny teenagers, It's very, very like it almost feels like if you taught an alien what slashers were and then said make the quintessential slasher movie,
Watchmen.
Madman is that movie, yeah.
It is. Yeah, it's a lot like The Burning. It really nails down the American slasher movie. I think, at least, and maybe I'm prone to summer camp movies. I never went to a summer camp, thank God. It sounds like a terrible experience, no matter what. But sleepaway camp is another one that comes real close, despite the sleaze factor in it. um, yeah, there's just so many good slasher movies out there, and again, I think most of them are the low budget, the outer fringes. The people that saw something and maybe wanted to emulate it and failed. Don't Go in the Woods. It's such a weird movie. That is such a weird movie, but I like it. I like. The first time I saw it, I was like, "What the hell is this?" Like, I could have made this movie, but it's shot on 35 millimeter. They filmed it in Nevada, up in the woods, and it's got the worst soundtrack I've ever heard on a film. But, but you can't take your eyes off of it. You got to give these people credit. I'm not gonna ever disparage anyone who makes a low budget movie because I know what it's like. I know what it takes. Anybody who finishes a film at a low budget level deserves some sort of credit. So, um, I don't, so, I guess that's a long answer to a short question, but yeah, I'd say Madman is one of my top five.
Yeah,
You'll
and
never get the
just
Madman Mars jingle out of your head either, will you?
Yeah.
Once you've heard it, that's it.
yeah, just piggybacking backing off your sentiments with "Don't Go in the Woods" as well. There's something like what the way you just described that's Sledgehammer to me,
Yeah.
which just feels so like, what is this? Like, this literally feels like I could have made it, and yet there's something magnetic about it. Like, there are parts of Sledgehammer, despite the fact that it is at times borderline incomprehensible. It feels like a shot on video fever dream. Like, I have no idea what's going on. And then that guy comes out with that plastic mask.
And,
It's
and
just
the, yeah,
with that VHS look to it, and it's genuinely like
that anchors.
disturbing. It's just so unsettling an image. There's something so ill-defined about it, but creepy, and like it's amazing to me that even in this kind of like shot on video thing that looks like it was made for $5 and a hot dog, you can find an image as striking as that man with the plastic mask and the sledgehammer just walking down the hallway. Like, it's great stuff.
Yeah. Those guys, the Pryor brothers. They went on to make 35 millimeter, big budget movies eventually. But they knew their limitations, and they knew what they could do. And Sledgehammer was one of those movies you had to see when you were, renting movies if it was in the store. Blood Cult, Sledgehammer, Boarding House. These shot on video outer fringe movies. Splatter Farm would be in the same boat. Um, you know, the thing with shot on video again is that there was a stigma attached to it because at the time, it's not like digital filmmaking today. It's not even video. You're recording video or in digital images at 24 frames per second. It easily replicates film. But those guys and us, we were just taking a format that was cheap and trying to make a film with it. And it has shot on video movies have this certain they just have this certain feel to them because back then the only thing that was shot on video were soap operas and porn films, and you didn't want to be associated with either. And distributors had a real bias towards it. You were lucky to find a distributor that would look at something that's shot on video because their first question was what was it shot on. That was always the first question you'd get. Sometimes you'd lie and say "It's shot on 16." Sometimes they wouldn't know the difference, but most of the time they did. I was just shot on video. We can't do anything with this. That's just those were the constraints you had against you when you were doing this kind of stuff. But be damned, you did it anyway, and you found a way around that roadblock to get your stuff out there. So.
So just a quick question for everybody. I haven't, but Beta Collector 9343 asks, has anybody seen the recently released Screamwalkers?
I have not. I've heard. I know it's out, but I haven't seen it. No.
Gareth, have
No, I
you seen
helped.
it
I
yet?
I did help promote it briefly, but I've not seen it yet. But the trailer is awesome, so it does look really good. So I do plan on checking it out at some point.
That'll be one for us to look into then, Beta Collector. Thank you for the recommendation. Let's have a look. Let's hit up some more questions. So, this is a good one. So obviously you've had a very long and lucrative career. So Scott, it's very prolific, very very
Prolific
prolific.
is a better word than
Yeah.
lucrative. Lucrative assumes I've made a lot of money doing. But let's fill that rumor right now.
Prolific, prolific. We'll,
Prolific.
we'll 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 soften it with the language of prolific.
I'll take that.
So in that career, Scott Cole would like to ask, what is the strangest or funniest thing that ever happened on one of your sets that didn't make it into the final cut? You must have some story amongst the 100+ films where something's gone
Yeah,
very.
gosh, I could talk about this forever, but we'll go back to Splatter Farm. We, there, if you remember the movie, there's these horses that are in the movie that we cut to, and Jeremy clubs one to death. We really wanted to do that, but obviously we couldn't or wouldn't. But we had built a cemetery towards the back of the farm because in our head, like, this was some like an adjacent cemetery on the property, and they would kill people and bury them. So we made all these headstones, and we dug this hole because that's where John was going to get thrown in. And we built this. We spent all day building the set, and we were going to come back the next evening and shoot because it was a night scene. And we came back earlier the next day, and our tombstones were either half missing or just literally gone. And we're like, what the hell happened to our cemeteries? It didn't blow away, and you could see pieces of it everywhere. Well, we had happened to look over, and the two horses had styrofoam all over their mouth. They had broken out of their paddock and walked over there and ate our entire cemetery.
Amazing.
And so
Fantastic.
that's why when he gets buried, it's just a hole. And I remember I said to Todd and John, I'm like, we need to clear all this stuff out of here because, styrofoam it's poisonous. I said, these horses are going to drop dead any minute, and we're going to be on the hook, for these horses because Todd Smith's grandmother rented a place for them to be there. So we're scrambling to clean it up, and the horses are just standing there watching us. And I'm just thinking, I'm going to look back, and they're going to be laying on their back with their feet up in the air. They didn't. I mean, the suckers, they lived, but they did ruin a nice cemetery set.
At least we got a happy ending where they didn't die. But yeah, it sounds like they were a bit of a
A
nightmare on the
couple days
set.
later, they were gone, and I never asked because I didn't care. But yeah, the only real production value we had on that film, and the horses ate it. So those are the things you got to deal with on a micro budget level.
With the 80s being so known, so famous for sequels, did you think about doing another Splatter Farm sort of straight away, or was it purposely left until, when was it, 2021? You did the
Yeah,
sequel?
yeah, that's a great question. At times we had thought about it, but you could never come up with the right story because the market had changed. You could never make a movie like that today and get it released. You'd have all kinds of problems. So we did talk about it. We even started shooting a sequel called I forget what it was. Splatter Farm Blood Reunion was the title. It's actually going to be on the Blu-ray release. What exists of it, like maybe 15 minutes, which is pretty cool. But we never finished it. I don't know why. I think we realized it was getting tougher to sell shot on video movies. We had other projects we had to do, so we just let it go. But Jeff Kirkendall, who works with me, we were on the set of Amityville Exorcism, and he says we were actually in a church shooting, believe it or not. And he's like, "Hey, Mark, I got an idea for a film. Do you mind if I write it? It's based on one of your movies." And of course, I got a million things going. Yeah, Jeff, sure, whatever. Not even remembering I had said that. And a couple weeks later, I get the script, and it says "Return to Splatter Farm." I'm like, "Oh my god!" Like, really? Like, and I read it, and it was really good. And I called him and I said, "Look, we could co-produce this," which we did. We had a long discussion about we changed a couple things, nothing major. We both agreed that we wanted to take a Friday the 13th approach to it versus the 3 on a meat hook approach, which I think was a good idea. And we shot the movie. We didn't go back to the original farmhouse because it doesn't exist anymore. We literally drove out there and there's nothing there. Just some stone wallings where the house and the barn used to be.
And bits of polystyrene.
And the horse is laying on their back with their feet. So we had to find a location, and by God, we found a place that when I went inside of it, I said, Jeff, this looks exactly like the farmhouse. The outside's a little different, but it's close enough after 30 years. And Todd Smith had passed away, and I figured Jeff Kirkendall could pass for Jeremy, 30 years later. So, and I can't remember. I still had that John Deere jacket, but we decided not to wear it because I'm sure at this juncture John Deere would not be real happy promoting their tractor line with a serial killer. But it was, it was just like shooting the original. It was, we're out there late at night, and it had its own ambience. We were there 10 minutes. We saw a skunk, 2 woodchuck, a deer, a possum, mice. There's 100 cats running around. We always had to chase out of the background. It was all that, but it was neat. We shot that, I think, over the course of 5 days, and we shot all the police station stuff in the winter. And then we shot the opening scene, which I really like. We shot that in the spring. So we started shooting it in the winter, the spring, and then the summer we finished it. And then we did the flashbacks with the 2 guys that played John and I. And people ask, why didn't you just use the original footage? And the reason is because when you and I tried this, I took footage and I cut the original into it, and it's like slamming into a wall. The quality is so disparaging that it took you out of the movie. So we went and refilmed that stuff, and I think it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, I caught up with it recently, and I loved it. I thought it was great. And my other question then is just, when's number 3 coming out? You've got to complete the trilogy. Everyone wants it.
That has been floated around, so it's you'll be the first to know. How about that?
Awesome.
We also have a question, I think, from a while ago. I can't find the comment now, but someone was asking, is there any chance of a new Feeders film as well?
We did 3 Feeders, 1, 2, and 3. I doubt it. I think we've done as much as we're gonna. The only thing to do with Feeders is to remake it with a slightly bigger budget, which that movie only cost $500, like literally $500, and that was for the puppets.
Wow.
And the spaceship, which we ended up not using and redoing with digital. But I think Feeders was the first micro budget movie, just barely before J.R. Bookwalter's Alien film. I can't think of the title of it, but we both used CGI. We were like the first proponents of early CGI in micro budget movies.
So we've got time for one last question. So I'm going to end on a very fun one. Christopher asks, if you could team up with any other cult filmmaker, living or dead, for a Grindhouse double feature, who would you pick, and what would the 2 titles be called?
Wow,
sorry, that was from Scott Cole. Just to give the right credit.
That's a hard question to answer. I like collaborating with just about anybody, and if we were going to do a double feature, it would definitely not be Grindhouse. The first movie in that was close to a Grindhouse movie. The second one, no. If Roger Corman saw Death Proof, he'd be like, I want you to cut 45 minutes out of it, a shower scene, and a gratuitous murder. And that would have been the end of it. I don't know. Maybe I'd do Splatter Farm 3 and remake Church of the Damned. That would be my drive-in double feature. And I
You can call it 3 on a Meat Hook at Splatter Farm.
yeah,
There
3 on a Splatter Farm meat hook. There you go.
There you
you
go.
go.
There you go. See, we're making history here.
Well, I'm afraid we're running out of time now, so I will have to wrap it up there. But I just want to say thank you so much, Mark, for joining us. I'll let everybody know that you did an excellent, excellent, excellent interview for the documentary. So if you've enjoyed this live event, I'm absolutely sure you'll enjoy hearing even more insight from Mark about the whole slasher subgenre, about some of his favorites, about some of the things he's working. He's got even more stories to share with you. You'll catch all that in the Slasher Trash documentary. And if you missed out on the chance to buy Slasher Trash the first time round, don't worry. You still have a chance to join our waitlist and will be the first to know when it goes on sale again. And you can do that at slashertrashdoc.com. Scroll down to the bottom of the page. There's a waitlist option. And yeah, it'll tell you all you got to do is sign up with an email and we will contact you the second a new sale becomes available. But other than that, that's all I'm going to say for today. Hope you enjoyed the live event, and thank you again so much, Mark, for joining us.
Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here.
See you guys later.
See you guys.